Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Socratic Circle, your podcast on modern themes from the classical world. I'm your host, Gabby Kim, and today I'm going to be sharing some thoughts on the Judgment of Paris and offering an analysis that scans the story under a modern feminist lens. So it's very easy to look back on pieces of stories and history that we have and criticize it with the kind of view that we hold now. But transporting ourselves out of the 21st century and into ancient Rome circa 8th century BC, let's talk about the Judgment of Paris. And by the way, if you haven't heard of the story, you can check out the overview video on the Pars for a quick background knowledge gain. Okay, so in ancient Rome, a woman does not have power, and we know this because of the volume of laws issued like Domesticas Potestas and Manus, where a man essentially has control over his wife, marriage, and family. And it's interesting because already you can see the high establishment of patriarchy in Rome, and today I think that a lot of our ideas on patriarchy can be traced back to the Roman fathers. And in the Judgment of Paris, you have a repeated theme here, the guy choosing a woman based on her looks. A criticism that can be brought up is basically how Paris is objectifying these women, and despite the many things they can bring to the table, boiling them down to their physical appearance. So today there's this trend circulating on TikTok, and it's called the male gaze, and women are basically rejecting it and dressing for the female gaze instead, where women enjoy other women feeling confident in their choice of outfit. It's essentially all about empowerment and sisterhood. So to the Judgment of Paris, it's a little bit weird to me because it's this partial time capsule to modern day, and because it works in the male gaze and glorifies it, but then it also establishes three goddesses, emblems of female power. It girls, if you will. So in a way, their self-confidence, potency, and auras are all very in line with girlhood and empowerment, but then reversely so, they're also turning to Paris and lending their identities to be measured by him. And normally, because we said we're going to listen and not judge, a man in ancient Rome having that kind of hand over a woman's pride isn't unheard of. It's actually very common. But this is an interesting dynamic because Paris is immortal, and to have a mortal kind of define the worth of three goddesses is very strange and out of place in terms of the kind of social setup. And not only that, but judging them based on their fairness kind of alludes that beauty equals power. And when you have someone like Aphrodite up against Athena, it seems like Athena's strategy and wisdom are easily dismissed in comparison to physicality. So there's a distinction that I guess is to each their own, but it's something to note, especially when I think that it fosters this kind of competition among the goddesses. And even as we insert ourselves into ancient culture, the power of these women are still very evident. So, these are goddesses worshipped across cultures by all kinds of people, really. So there and also here in the 21st century, I think that we would agree in saying that the goddesses were portrayed with a huge lack of agency, and we can really highlight the absurdity of the whole beauty contest. And I think one of the more disturbing points of the story is how Helen of Troy is offered to Paris by a goddess as a prize, and essentially she's a commodity. And even though she's engaged in a whole other relationship, that's quickly tossed out at the decision of Paris. And I think that can be seen as a betrayal of the sisterhood that supposedly girls we automatically have with each other. That's kind of a link that we know today. But I think the Judgment of Paris is really framed as a myth that mirrors these ancient patriarchal values and also seeps its influence. So when I see shows like The Bachelor or Miss Universe pageants where judgment is given to an outside set of eyes and defined by more shallow aspects of identity, I see Paris, Athena, Aphrodite, and Hera, and to me, the goddesses represent the three big features of what we would call an it girl today. So wisdom, beauty, and command. And I think that the Judgment of Paris essentially contradicts itself in a lot of ways, because while it does portray heavy female power, it also subjects them to being defined by a mortal, which is something that the gods wouldn't have hesitated to conjure up a punishment for. So whether we're looking at a myth from the 8th century BC or a dating show that's airing last night, I feel like we're still seeing the same kind of script play out. Women being evaluated, compared, and chosen. But I think what makes myths like the Judgment of Paris so valuable is that they let us kind of see it being mirrored across time. And so maybe now we're able to rewrite that script a little bit, where beauty isn't, the only currency, and where women don't have to be chosen to have power, and where the it girl doesn't need Paris. She really just needs herself. Thanks for tuning in to the Socratic Circle. I'm Gabby Kim, and I'll catch you next time for another episode where the classics collide with now.